Hi there. Today I did a meditation or introspection, as I call it, and I used some of the 12 different aspects of introspection that I've described and sort of brought them all together, as it were. Well, experienced them pretty much all together. And I had a feeling of intense quietude, out of which I got the following information. Um, what I would call the voice of the silence, or arising from the voice of the silence, and that is this curious term called K'shia. And K'shIA is basically well, it arises as a result of doing or following a spiritual path, pretty much any spiritual path, and pretty much any spiritual discipline, whether it's mantra yoga or hatha yoga or any of the 8 yogas, or prayer, a life of contemplation, a life of charity, a life of service to humanity and to others. And I suppose basically it's kind of like an accumulation of what might be called spiritual merit, but I mean, this is a bit of a dualistic term because it sort of implies that there's demerit as well, which there isn't, as I'll come on to at the end of this presentation. Kashir is more accurately a reservoir of peaceful, positive inclinations or thoughts, or tendencies, or conclusions, or feelings. I suppose, yes, feelings, awarenesses, if it could be a plural of awareness, and the peaceful and the positive, and it's sort of a build up of positive charge. It's actually filling what Blavatsky called the higher mind. So if you think of the higher mind as a chalice, as the Grail, then you're filling the Holy Grail of the higher mind with Kashir. And um, so basically, it has other qualities as well. It's a selection of memories of ecstasy, and the beautiful things that happen to the body as well. So ecstasy, physical ecstasy, mental ecstasy, emotional ecstasy, and these memories are sort of packaged up, as it were. It's a bit like the Buddhist idea of skanda, where all the where you're basically everything that you've experienced in this life is sort of rolled up into a little ball. And because Buddhism obviously has reincarnation at its core, the skandha is what you take on to your next incarnation. And in fact, you have skandhas, obviously millions of skandhas from your previous incarnations. And so you're building up a vast reservoir of experiences, and karma, as you go forward to the next incarnation. Well, this isn't exactly like that, really, but it is certainly a reservoir, a collection of ecstatic memories, and it's also a storehouse of treasures of learning, and of wisdom, all the life lessons that you've picked up along the way, all the wise words that you've heard from both people, and from scripture, and just from your own life and observation, and from observing nature as well, and it's it's also a power word in itself, K'shia, because I was thinking about this and I thought, well, as soon as I talk about Kashir, I'm not going to be able to to accumulate anymore, because I'm going to kind of consciously try to do it, and then because I'm consciously trying to do something, it won't do anything. But then I had the comforting thought that all you have to do is say the word Kashir, as a sort of as a power word or an anchor word to begin your meditation and during your meditation to keep you anchored to the here and now, and to keep you sort of connected to the divine. So basically, you don't have to worry about forgetting everything or because you're trying too hard. This is a word which disperses this trying too hard to obtain K'shIA. K'shIA, I suppose that's how you pronounce it, K'shIA. And so it is a word, a power word in its own right, and it dispels dispersion, as it were, which might naturally arise, and it disperses what can be called lust of result, which is when you just try too hard to achieve the same results as you did yesterday. And I mean, everything is flowing all the time, so that's pretty much impossible, you see. And you just stress yourself out by trying. Anyway, but the important thing is that you're filling up your higher mind with K'shIA, and it becomes basically the means by which your higher mind it becomes, and I say attached, but it's not exactly attachment really. Well, it's certainly not an emotional attachment. I just couldn't think of another word really, or I suppose aligned to soul, and might be called soul awareness in this universe. But as the soul begins its journey home to the spiritual realm, to the transcendent deity, to the transcendent reality, it takes your consciousness, which has been created by the K'shIA, with it, basically. So it's like following on from what I said about the chariot. You're basically getting on board the chariot as it goes back, or you're getting on, you're becoming one with the comet as a sort of transcendental comet as it flies through the universe and begins its great journey back to where it came from. So K'shIA is what you need to accumulate over your life as a result of spiritual practices of various kinds. And as I say, you build up this reservoir of positivity, which, as I say, you carry over or into the transcendent realm. It's just a natural process by which this is done, and K'shIA refers to this natural process, and it's a process which which accumulates day by day, sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly, or depending on circumstances and distractions and whatever. And at some point, before you lose the here, the now is then distilled out from the here, and becomes eternal. So you take the now, and that becomes eternal, and it's distilled from the now. So you have here and now, which is a great experience to have on the way to experiencing eternal now, you see. And as the Hindus call it, Sit Sat Ananda, which is perfect being, perfect consciousness, and perfect bliss. And so K'shIA is a kind of the stuff, the spiritual merit, as it in quotation marks, that enables you to basically it's really the baggage of consciousness that the soul will allow to take back to the transcendent. And of course, as far as we are concerned, on this particular universe, in this universe, we take everything with us back to the transcendental realm. And we take the peaceful, positive, wisdom-filled, ecstatic moments of our lives back with us. Because, of course, it should be remembered that, despite saying about, matter is evil and spirit is good, well, of course, matter is a mixture of good and evil, a mixture of nice and nasty, and a whole lot in between. But I have to say that since the forces are creative and preserving, then it's only a third of the forces which are destructive. So 60% of matter is in fact preserving and creative. So, one has to be careful about being too dualistic and saying that matter is evil, all evil, because in fact, 30% of it is destructive, what we might call evil, which note I say call anyway, and 60% of it is the stuff that you'd want to take with you as a collection of memories and impressions and imprints on your psyche as you begin the journey back to the transcendent realm, having attained oneness with soul, and your higher mind has attained oneness with soul as a result of the accumulation of K'shia. And so I just leave this teaching with you. I don't know, is it literal or is it metaphorical? Is it sort of referring to some kind of archetypal situation? I don't know. I can't say. None of us will be able to say until either we experience all this or we don't. And if we don't experience it, well, we'll be hardly in a position to say anything about it as well, because if you don't accumulate K'shIA, and your consciousness goes back to the elements that gave you life in the first place, then in fact, of course, you won't be able to say yes or no anyway. People talk about the great white light and going into the light and all this, but none of us knows exactly. We just know well. We don't know things that simply. We know a lot of complications, perhaps, or complicated theology or cosmology, which I suppose could be just metaphorical language for something incredibly simple, like falling off a log. You know what I mean? And falling and falling and falling into eternity, and that might be the experience of it, as it were, of transcendence or translation, as sometimes it's called. When you translate from this physical realm to the spiritual realm, for example, it's called translation in some mystery schools. Well, literally, I suppose your substance is translated into something else. The language of your life, the language of your psyche, is literally translated into a language where a language which enables you to perhaps become aware or conscious of the transcendent. Perhaps that. But anyway, I leave this teaching to you. To make of it of what you will. I'm not saying this is dogma. I'm not saying this is like you've got to believe this or something like this. It's just something which arose from the voice of the silence, which very briefly, I was able to touch today as a result of meditation. And that doesn't happen too often to me, I can tell you that.